The tray tilted, the glass slipped, and Ruby Fletcher's entire world collapsed into a single horrifying moment as deep crimson wine cascaded down the front of the most pristine white shirt she had ever seen. Time seemed to freeze. The elegant restaurant, with its glittering chandeliers and hushed conversations, fell into a silence so profound that Ruby could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She stood there, frozen, the empty wine glass still clutched in her trembling hand, staring at the spreading red stain across the chest of the man seated at table 7. Not just any man. The man who had every server whispering nervously in the kitchen, whose reservation had made their manager practically vibrate with anxiety, whose presence had transformed the entire atmosphere of Belladonna's from merely upscale to something approaching reverence. And he was laughing. Not a polite chuckle or an awkward attempt to diffuse her obvious panic. A genuine warm laugh that seemed to roll through the space like thunder, rich and somehow musical. Ruby's eyes snapped up from the disaster on his chest to his face, and for the first moment since the spill, she actually looked at him. Really looked at him. He was beautiful in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Pale skin that seemed to glow in the soft restaurant lighting, so smooth and perfect it looked like carved marble. Hair that fell past his shoulders, white as fresh snow, pulled back partially, but with strands escaping to frame a face that belonged in a museum. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that were the deepest red she had ever seen, like garnets or wine held up to firelight. Those eyes crinkled at the corners now as he continued to laugh, looking down at his ruined shirt with what appeared to be genuine amusement. "I'm so sorry," Ruby finally managed to choke out, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hands shook as she fumbled for the napkin at her waist, leaning forward instinctively to try to blot at the stain before her brain caught up with her body. Her fingers brushed against his chest and she froze again, cold. His body was cold even through the soaked fabric. "Please don't trouble yourself," he said, his voice accented with something old-world and elegant, European perhaps, but not quite placeable. He caught her wrist gently, stopping her frantic dabbing. His fingers were long and elegant and also cold against her heated skin. "It is only a shirt." "An expensive shirt," Ruby said miserably, thinking of the designer label she'd glimpsed at his collar when she'd been pouring. "I'll pay for the cleaning, or replacement. I'm so sorry, I don't know what happened. The tray just breathed," he interrupted, and when she looked up at him in confusion, his lips curved into a smile that made her breath catch for an entirely different reason. "You forgot to breathe. I have been watching you since you entered the dining room, carrying that tray as though it weighed 100 pounds, holding your breath with each step. One must breathe, piccola cameriera, even during disasters." Ruby realized he was right. She gasped in air now, feeling lightheaded. The nickname he'd used, spoken in what sounded like Italian, made her cheeks flush. "I'm new," she admitted, then wanted to kick herself. Why was she explaining herself to this customer she'd just assaulted with wine? "I gathered as much." He released her wrist but didn't lean away, still studying her with those impossible red eyes. Ruby wondered distantly if they were contacts, some kind of fashion statement. Rich people did strange things. "What is your name?" Ruby Fletcher." She grabbed napkins from a nearby table, trying once more to be helpful, but he waved her off. "Ruby," he repeated as if tasting the word. "How fitting. Ruby, I am Bastian Beaumont, and I insist that you stop apologizing. In fact, I must thank you." That finally broke through her panic-induced fog. "Thank me? For ruining your dinner?" "For providing the most entertainment I have had in a decade," he said, and while his tone was light, something in his eyes suggested he might not be entirely joking about the time frame. "And for reminding me what it feels like to be surprised. That is a rare gift indeed." Before Ruby could formulate a response to that strange statement, her manager, Mr. Peterson, came rushing over, his round face flushed with distress and anger. "Mr. Beaumont, I cannot apologize enough for this, Ruby." He turned to her, and she actually flinched at the fury in his expression. "My office, now. You're fit." "You will do nothing of the sort," Bastian said quietly, but something in his voice made Mr. Peterson's mouth snap shut mid-word. Ruby watched, amazed as her rotund, usually bombastic manager actually took a step backward. "The young lady made an honest mistake. There will be no punishment, no firing, nothing but an acceptance of my sincere assurance that no harm was done. Are we understood?" Mr. Peterson's face went through several interesting color changes before settling on a pallid gray. Of course, Mr. Beaumont. Whatever you say, sir. Ruby, get back to work, and for God's sake, be more careful. Actually, Bastian said, rising from his chair in one fluid movement that made Ruby take a step back herself, I find I am no longer in the mood for dining here. Too many eyes, too much attention now. He gestured at the other diners who were indeed staring at their table with undisguised curiosity. Ruby, would you be so kind as to accompany me elsewhere? There is a matter I would like to discuss with you. I what? Ruby looked from him to her manager and back again. I'm working. I can't just leave. You can and you will, Mr. Peterson said immediately, practically shoving her toward Bastian. Whatever Mr. Beaumont wants, Mr. Beaumont gets. Go on, girl. Don't keep him waiting. This was insane. Ruby opened her mouth to protest, to point out that going off with strange customers was absolutely not in her job description, but Bastian was already walking toward the exit, clearly expecting her to follow. She looked down at herself, still in her white button-up shirt and black slacks, her apron splattered with wine, her hair falling out of its bun. Well? Mr. Peterson hissed. Go, Ruby went. She caught up with Bastian just outside the restaurant, on the street where the autumn evening had turned cold. He stood waiting beside a car that looked like it cost more than her yearly salary, all sleek black lines and tinted windows. A driver emerged from the front, another pale man with that same ethereal quality, wearing a dark suit and sunglasses despite the fact that it was nearly 9 at night. Please, get in, Bastian said, gesturing to the back door the driver had opened. I don't even know you, Ruby protested, even as her feet carried her closer to the vehicle. Something about this man made her want to listen, to follow, even when every rational part of her brain screamed that this was a terrible idea. For all I know, you could be a serial killer. I assure you I am nothing so mundane, Bastian replied with that same warm laugh. I simply wish to speak with you, away from prying eyes and curious ears. You have my word that no harm will come to you. I am merely intrigued. There was something in his eyes, those impossible red eyes that made Ruby believe him. Against all logic, against all common sense, she found herself sliding into the back seat of the car. Bastian followed, settling beside her with an easy grace that suggested he was accustomed to luxury. The door closed with a soft click that felt terribly final. Where are we going? Ruby asked as the car pulled smoothly into traffic. Somewhere we can talk properly, Bastian said. He had angled himself toward her, one arm draped along the back of the seat. In the close confines of the car, she could see him even more clearly. His features were almost too perfect, too symmetrical, like a painting brought to life. And there was that cold quality to him, not just his skin, but something deeper, something that suggested winter and stillness and eternity. Tell me, Ruby Fletcher, what do you believe in? Excuse me? Do you believe in the supernatural? In creatures that exist beyond human understanding? In magic? In immortality? In the darkness that lives alongside the light? Ruby stared at him, trying to determine if he was serious or testing her somehow. I believe in paying my rent and getting through each day, she said finally. I don't have time for philosophy or fantasy. A practical answer, Bastian observed. Yet you tremble. She was trembling, Ruby realized. Had been since the moment she'd spilled that wine, but the shaking had intensified since entering the car. I'm cold, she said, which was partly true. The back seat was frigid, despite the warm air blowing from the vents. Bastian made a soft sound, almost disappointed. Then he did something that shocked her completely. He shrugged out of his ruined suit jacket and draped it around her shoulders. The fabric was still damp with wine, still cold from his body, but the gesture itself was so unexpectedly kind that Ruby felt tears prick at her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. You're afraid of me, he said, not a question but an observation. Yes, Ruby admitted. I don't know why, but yes. Good. Fear is the beginning of wisdom. The car turned down a street Ruby didn't recognize, away from the glittering downtown area into a section of the city dominated by older buildings, Gothic architecture that spoke of a different era. I'm going to tell you something now, Ruby, and I want you to truly listen, not with your mind, which will immediately reject what I say as impossible, but with your instincts, with that part of you that has been screaming warning since you first looked into my eyes. The car stopped in front of an enormous building that might have once been a church, all stone spires and stained glass windows now lit from within by warm light. Bastian waited until the driver opened the door, then stepped out and offered his hand to Ruby. She took it automatically, his cold fingers closing around her warm ones, and followed him toward a heavy wooden door that opened as they approached. Inside was another world. The exterior might have looked like an abandoned cathedral, but the interior had been transformed into something between a palace and a fortress. Soaring ceilings disappeared into shadow above them. The walls were hung with tapestries that looked centuries old. Furniture that belonged in museums stood in casual arrangements throughout the space, and everywhere were people who looked like Bastian, pale, beautiful, moving with that same preternatural grace, and they were all staring at her. "Welcome," Bastian said softly, his hand moving to the small of her back, "to the Court of Shadows, the home of the vampire covenant of this city and the seat of my power as their king." Ruby's legs gave out. She would have collapsed right there on the marble floor if Bastian hadn't caught her, sweeping her up into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing. She clutched at his shoulders, feeling the impossible strength in them, the coldness of his body, and finally, let herself acknowledge what some deep primal part of her had known from the moment she'd looked into those red eyes. He wasn't human. None of them were. Vampires. "Breathe, Ruby," Bastian murmured, carrying her through the watching crowd as if she belonged in his arms, as if this were perfectly normal. "I told you before. You must breathe." Ruby dragged in air and promptly passed out. When she woke, she was lying on something impossibly soft. A bed, she realized, in a room lit by dozens of candles. The ceiling above her was painted with some kind of mural, angels and demons intertwined in eternal battle. She sat up quickly, too quickly, and the room spun. "Easy!" Bastian was there, sitting in a chair beside the bed, still in that wine-stained white shirt. "You have been unconscious for nearly 20 minutes. I was beginning to worry." "Vampires," Ruby said, her voice hoarse. "You said vampires." "I did. That's impossible. And yet here we are." Bastian leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, those red eyes locked on her face. "I could have let you leave the restaurant, Ruby. I could have allowed you to believe I was simply an eccentric wealthy man with unusual fashion tastes and a penchant for colored contacts. But I chose not to. Do you know why?" Ruby shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Because when you touched me, when your hands brushed my chest and your skin met mine, I felt something I have not experienced in 3 centuries. Warmth. Not physical warmth, though yours did burn against my cold flesh, but warmth here." He pressed a hand to his chest, over his heart. A stirring of something I thought long dead. Interest, curiosity, a desire to know more, to understand what it is about you that could pierce through centuries of carefully maintained distance. "I'm nobody," Ruby said, finding her voice though it shook. "I'm a waitress who can barely make rent, who's working 2 jobs just to stay afloat, who spilled wine on you because I'm clumsy and nervous and not cut out for fine dining service. There's nothing special about me." "You are wrong." Bastian stood, moving to the side of the bed with that liquid grace that now made terrible sense. A predator's grace. "You are vibrantly, achingly alive in a way I had forgotten existed. Your warmth, your fear, your honesty, even your clumsiness, it is all so beautifully, painfully human. And I find I cannot look away." Ruby's heart was racing so fast she could hear it thundering in her ears. "What do you want from me?" "I want to know you," Bastian said simply. "I want to understand what it is about one nervous waitress that could make me feel again after so long feeling nothing. And I want you to stay here, in my home, under my protection, until I have satisfied this curiosity." "You're kidnapping me." The words came out flat, shocked. "No, I am asking. There is a difference, and it is significant." Bastian moved closer, but stopped when Ruby flinched back. Pain flashed across his perfect features. "I will not force you, Ruby. I am not a monster, whatever you may think, but I am offering you something extraordinary. Time in a world you never knew existed, under the protection of the most powerful vampire in this territory with all the luxury and safety that entails. In exchange, I ask only for your company, your conversation, your presence. And if I say no, then my driver will take you home and you will never see me again. You have my word. I will even ensure that your job at the restaurant is secure and that you receive compensation for the distress I have caused you tonight." Bastian's expression was earnest, open in a way that somehow made him seem more dangerous rather than less. "But I hope you will say yes." Ruby looked around the room, really seeing it for the first time. The bed she lay on was draped in midnight blue silk. The furniture was all dark wood, carved with intricate designs. Paintings hung on the walls, originals by masters she vaguely recognized from art history classes. A door stood open to what looked like a private bathroom beyond. And everywhere, that sense of age, of history, of things that had existed long before she was born and would continue long after she was gone. "How old are you?" she asked. 347 years, Bastian replied without hesitation. "I was born in France in 1679 and died there in 1699. I have been undead for longer than your country has existed, Ruby Fletcher." The certainty in his voice, the specificity of the dates, made it real in a way nothing else had. Ruby felt hysteria bubbling up in her chest. This is insane. This is completely insane. "Yes," Bastian agreed, "it is. So what will you do? Flee back to your ordinary life, forever wondering if this night was real or some elaborate hallucination? Or stay and discover the truth of what exists in the shadows of your world?" Ruby thought of her tiny apartment with its leaking ceiling and broken heater. She thought of her other job at the coffee shop, of her mounting student loans for a degree she'd never finished, of the endless grinding struggle just to survive. She thought of how, for the first time in years, she felt truly alive right now, even terrified as she was. "How long?" she asked. Bastian's eyes lit up, triumph and something softer flashing through them. "As long as it takes." "That's not an answer." "Then let us say a week. 1 week, Ruby. 7 days in my world, and then if you wish to leave, you may do so freely. I will ask nothing more of you." A week, 7 days. It was insane, reckless, possibly the stupidest decision she could make. Ruby opened her mouth to say no, to demand he take her home immediately. "Yes," she heard herself say instead. 1 week. The smile that spread across Bastian's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and completely at odds with everything she knew about vampires. "Then you honor me, Ruby Fletcher, and I swear to you, on my name and my crown, that you will come to no harm while under my protection. From this moment forward, you are mine to guard." The possessiveness in those words should have frightened her. Instead, they sent a strange thrill down her spine. What had she just agreed to? The next morning, if it could even be called morning when she'd apparently slept until 2 in the afternoon, Ruby woke to find clothes laid out for her on a chair. Not her wine-splattered work uniform, but beautiful things in soft fabrics, all in her size. A note rested on top in elegant handwriting that might have been done with an actual quill. "Good afternoon, Ruby. Please dress and join me in the Eastern Solarium when you are ready. Take your time. We have nothing but time. B." The bathroom was marble and gold with a shower that had more settings than her car back home. Ruby stood under water hot enough to turn her skin pink, trying to process the reality of her situation. Vampires existed. She was in a vampire king's home. She had agreed to stay for a week. "You've lost your mind," she told her reflection as she toweled off. The face that stared back at her looked the same as always. Brown eyes too large for her face, scattered freckles across her nose, ordinary brown hair that never quite cooperated. Nothing special, nothing remarkable. Certainly nothing that would catch the attention of an immortal being. But Bastian had looked at her like she was precious, like she mattered. Ruby dried her hair as best she could and dressed in the clothes provided. Black pants that fit perfectly, a soft sweater in deep green that brought out her eyes, even undergarments in exactly her size, which was both thoughtful and mildly disturbing. How did he know her measurements? She found the Eastern Solarium after only 2 wrong turns and 1 moment of panic, when she'd opened a door to find what looked like a library that stretched back into impossible darkness. Bastian was waiting, standing by a wall of windows that looked out onto a private garden. The glass was tinted heavily, she noticed, allowing him to stand in the muted daylight without apparent discomfort. "The old myths are not entirely accurate," he said without turning around, somehow knowing she was there. "Sunlight does harm us, but not as dramatically as legend suggests. It weakens, burns slowly rather than incinerating instantly. Still unpleasant enough that we avoid it when possible, but tinted glass provides sufficient protection for brief exposures." "Oh," Ruby said, moving into the room properly. It was beautiful, all windows and plants, the greenery carefully tended. "Can you read minds too?" Now Bastian did turn, and she was struck again by how beautiful he was. He'd changed clothes, now wearing dark pants and a black shirt that made his pale skin and white hair seem even more ethereal. No, but I could hear your heartbeat increase when you saw the windows, and it was not difficult to guess your thoughts. You were wondering what is real and what is fiction regarding my kind. Can you blame me? Not at all. Please sit, I have had food prepared for you. He gestured to a small table set with what looked like an elaborate brunch. Ruby's stomach growled in response, reminding her that she'd last eaten a rushed sandwich during her break at the restaurant the previous evening. She sat, eyeing the food warily. You don't eat? I can, but it provides no sustenance. Only blood maintains us. Bastian sat across from her, watching as she tentatively picked up a fork. But I do remember the pleasure of fine food, and I enjoy the aroma still. Please, eat. I promise nothing is poisoned or drugged. That's exactly what someone who'd poisoned the food would say, Ruby pointed out, but she was already cutting into what looked like a perfectly prepared omelet. The first bite was heaven. She hadn't had food this good since ever, actually. Bastian laughed that warm laugh again. Your suspicion is understandable and wise, but consider, if I wished you harm, I could simply drink from you directly. There would be no need for elaborate poisoning schemes. Ruby paused mid-bite. That's not actually reassuring. No, I suppose it is not. Let me try again. I give you my word as king of this covenant, bound by laws older than your civilization, that you are safe here. The penalty for harming a human under royal protection is final death. No vampire in this territory would dare touch you. What about you touching me? Something flashed in those red eyes, heat and hunger quickly suppressed. I am bound by my word as much as any of my subjects, more so, in fact. A king who breaks his oath is no king at all. You are safe from me, Ruby. Even if every instinct I possess screams at me to taste you, to drink from that lovely neck, to discover if you taste as sweet as you smell. Ruby's hand flew to her throat automatically. You can't just say things like that. Why not? You asked for honesty. Bastian leaned back in his chair, the picture of aristocratic ease, though his eyes never left her. I am a predator, Ruby. That's the simple truth of what I am. You are prey, but I am also a man, or was once, and I remember what it means to deny base urges in favor of higher purposes. Your safety is more important than my hunger. And beyond that, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I find I want more from you than your blood. I want to know your thoughts, your fears and dreams, what makes you laugh, what makes you angry. These are things I cannot take by force. Ruby set down her fork, appetite warring with unease. Why me? You still haven't really explained. There are millions of humans in this city. What makes me different? I wish I knew. Bastian's expression became troubled, less certain than she'd yet seen him. When you touched me, when our skin met, something inside me recognized something in you. A resonance, perhaps. A connection I cannot name, but cannot deny. It may be nothing. It may be everything. That is what I hope to discover in the time we have together. And after a week, if you haven't figured it out, then I let you go and spend eternity wondering. He said it lightly, but Ruby caught the undercurrent of something deeper, fear, perhaps, or loneliness. But I'm hoping very much that I do figure it out, and that you feel it too. Ruby did feel something. That was the terrifying part. Sitting here in this beautiful room with this dangerous ancient creature should have filled her with nothing but fear. And yet beneath the fear was fascination, curiosity, a strange, inappropriate attraction to someone who was, quite literally, inhuman. Tell me about your world, she said, picking up her fork again, deciding that if she was going to be here for a week, she might as well learn everything she could. How many of you are there? How does it work, vampires, living alongside humans without us knowing? Bastian's face brightened, pleased by her question. He settled in more comfortably and began to speak. He told her about the covenant structure, how vampires organize themselves into territories ruled by kings or queens, each sovereign in their domain but bound by ancient laws that governed their kind. He explained that there were perhaps 50,000 vampires worldwide, a tiny fraction of humanity, spread across every continent except Antarctica. He described the elaborate masquerade they maintained, the careful balancing act of feeding without killing, of using wealth and power to move through human society while never revealing their true nature. "We are not the only supernatural creatures," he said, surprising her, "though we are among the most organized. Werewolves exist, though they are rare and prefer to live away from cities. Witches practice in secret, trading their power for various prices. There are older things, too, creatures that have no names in human languages, that exist in the spaces between reality. We vampires serve as a kind of barrier, actually. We maintain order among the supernatural, ensure that humans remain ignorant and safe from things they cannot comprehend." "That seems almost noble," Ruby said, "for blood-sucking monsters." "We contain multitudes," Bastion replied with a slight grin. "Noble and monstrous both. We've had centuries to become complex, Ruby. Good and evil are such simple concepts when you have eternity to explore the gradations between." They talked for hours. Ruby finished her meal and moved through tea and pastries that appeared as if by magic, though she assumed actual servants brought them while she was distracted. Bastion answered her questions patiently, never condescending, seeming genuinely pleased by her curiosity. He told her stories of his long life, of the French court where he'd been a minor noble before his turning, of the vampire who had made him, and the decades of mentorship that followed. "Do you miss being human?" Ruby asked as the afternoon light faded into evening beyond the tinted windows. Bastion considered the question seriously. "I mourn it," he said finally. "The way one mourns a childhood home, long since torn down. I remember what it was, can feel nostalgia for its warmth and simplicity. But I do not think I would go back, even if such a thing were possible. I have seen too much, learned too much, become too much of what I am now to fit back into the confines of mortality." "But you're alone," Ruby said softly, surprising herself with the observation. "You're surrounded by others of your kind. You're a king, and yet you're alone. I can see it in your eyes." Something cracked in Bastion's carefully maintained composure. He looked away, out at the darkening garden, and for a moment he seemed less like an ancient powerful being and more like a man carrying a weight too heavy to bear. Yes," he whispered. "I am alone. I have been alone for longer than you have been alive. There are those who serve me, who respect or fear me, who call themselves my subjects or allies. But there is no one who truly knows me. No one who sees beyond the crown and the power to the creature beneath, still wondering after 3 centuries what the point of immortality might be when there is no one to share it with." Ruby found herself reaching across the table without thinking, her hand covering his where it rested on the dark wood. His skin was cold under hers, but she didn't pull back. "I see you," she said, not even sure what she meant, but knowing it was true. "I don't know you yet, but I see you. The loneliness, the hope hidden behind all that confidence, the way you're so careful with your words because you're afraid of scaring me away, but also afraid of not saying enough to make me want to stay." Bastion stared at their joined hands, then slowly turned his over so their palms met, his fingers threading through hers. "You are extraordinary, Ruby Fletcher, and you do not even realize it." They sat like that as darkness fell completely, hands joined across the table, human warmth meeting vampire cold, neither speaking because there were no words for what passed between them in that moment. Understanding, perhaps, recognition, the first threads of something that might, given time, become something profound. The week began to take shape around them. Ruby fell into a strange routine, sleeping in the luxurious bedroom Bastion had given her, waking in the afternoon to find him waiting somewhere in the vast building that served as both home and court. They would talk, sometimes for hours, about everything and nothing. He taught her about his world, and she taught him about hers, about modern life and the struggles of ordinary people he'd become too removed from to understand. On the 3rd day, he asked if she wanted to meet others of his kind properly. Until then, she'd glimpsed them in hallways, pale, beautiful figures who would bow to Bastion and study her with curious, hungry eyes before moving on. But he'd kept her isolated, she realized, protected in his private quarters away from the court proper. "You don't have to," Bastion said when he saw her hesitation. "My people can be overwhelming, and not all of them will understand why you are here." "I want to," Ruby said with more confidence than she felt. "If I'm going to be here, I should understand all of it, not just the pretty parts you show me." Pride flashed across his face. "You are braver than you give yourself credit for." "Very well. Tonight there is a gathering. You will attend at my side under my explicit protection. No one will dare harm or even disrespect you, on pain of facing my wrath." That evening, Ruby dressed in clothes Bastion had provided, a deep red dress that flowed like wine around her body. Appropriate, she thought with dark humor, given how they'd met. A servant, a young vampire woman with kind eyes, helped her with her hair, pulling it up in an elegant style that left her neck exposed. Ruby noticed the girl's gaze linger on her throat, saw the slight flash of fang as she swallowed. "Does it bother you?" Ruby asked quietly. "Being around me? The smell of my blood?" The vampire girl blinked in surprise at being addressed directly. "Yes, mistress," she admitted, "but the king's will is absolute. You are protected. We would no more harm you than we would bite the king himself." "I'm not a mistress," Ruby protested. "I'm just a guest." "You are the human the king has chosen to bring into his private chambers, to share his time with, to protect above all others," the girl replied, meeting Ruby's eyes in the mirror. "In our world, that makes you far more than a guest, whether you understand it yet or not." Before Ruby could ask what that meant, Bastian appeared in the doorway. He had dressed formally, in a black suit with a high collar, silver embroidery at the cuffs that caught the light. His white hair was pulled back fully, showing the sharp planes of his face. He looked like a dark prince from a fairy tale, beautiful and dangerous and entirely too much. "You look perfect," he said, his voice low and appreciative in a way that made heat flood Ruby's cheeks. "Like a ruby set in darkness. Are you ready?" "No," Ruby said honestly, "but let's go anyway." He offered his arm like an old-world gentleman, and she took it, feeling the strength coiled under the expensive fabric. Together they walked through the corridors of his home, and Ruby noticed that lights dimmed and brightened as they passed, as if responding to his presence. Or perhaps that was just her imagination running wild. The gathering was held in an enormous hall that must have been the main sanctuary when this building was a church. Now it hosted dozens of vampires, all dressed in finery that ranged from historical costume to modern fashion. They all turned as one when Bastian entered, and the weight of their attention nearly drove Ruby to her knees. "Steady," Bastian murmured, his arm tightening around hers. "I have you. Remember to breathe." Ruby breathed and forced herself to look at the assembled crowd. So many of them, all with that same pale beauty, those same predatory eyes. Some watched her with curiosity, others with barely concealed hunger, a few with outright hostility. She was prey walking into a den of predators wearing a target on her back. "My court," Bastian said, his voice carrying through the space with natural authority. "I present to you Ruby Fletcher, who dwells under my personal protection as my honored guest. She is to be treated with the same respect you would show me. Any who break this decree will answer to me directly. Is this understood?" A murmur of assent rippled through the crowd, but Ruby caught the undercurrents, the confusion and speculation. This wasn't normal, she realized. Kings didn't bring human guests to court. Whatever Bastian was doing, it was unprecedented. A woman stepped forward from the crowd, tall and elegant with long white hair twisted up in elaborate braids. "My king," she said, her voice melodious but cold. "Might I inquire as to the purpose of this arrangement? Humans are food or occasionally servants. They are not brought before the court as honored guests." "Then consider this a new precedent, Lysandra," Bastian replied smoothly. "One that I expect you all to adapt to quickly." Lysandra's red eyes flickered to Ruby, assessment in her gaze. "And what does the human offer in exchange for such extraordinary protection? What service does she provide?" "That is between myself and Ruby," Bastian said, and now there was a sharp edge to his voice. "Do you challenge my authority in this matter, Lysandra?" "Never, my king," Lysandra said quickly, bowing her head. But Ruby saw the calculation in her eyes, the wheels turning. She had made an enemy, she realized. Just by existing, by being here, she had threatened something in the vampire court's established order. The evening progressed in a blur of introductions and carefully polite conversations. Bastian kept Ruby at his side constantly, his hand at her back or her arm through his, a constant physical reminder of his protection. Some vampires were kind, curious in a genuine way about who she was and why she was here. Others were coldly hostile, making their displeasure known through sneers and cutting remarks delivered with exquisite politeness. Through it all, Bastian remained a steady presence, deflecting the worst of the attention, redirecting conversations when they turned too personal or too threatening. Ruby found herself leaning into him, drawing strength from his certainty, his power, his absolute confidence that she belonged here beside him. "You are doing beautifully," he murmured during a brief moment when they were alone at the edge of the hall, watching the vampires dance to music that sounded like it came from another century. "I know this is overwhelming. That woman, Lysandra, Ruby said quietly. She hates me. She fears you, Bastian corrected. There is a difference. Lysandra has positioned herself as my closest advisor for decades. She sees you as a threat to that position. But I'm not. I'm nobody. I'm just here for a few more days and then I'm gone. Bastian's expression became shuttered, the warmth draining from his face. Yes, of course. 4 more days. I had not forgotten. He had forgotten, Ruby realized, or had let himself believe that maybe she would stay longer. The thought sent a strange pang through her chest. In just 3 days, she had become accustomed to his presence, to their long conversations, and the way he looked at her like she mattered. The idea of going back to her ordinary life, of never seeing him again, felt wrong in a way she couldn't name. Bastian, she started, not sure what she was going to say, but a commotion at the far end of the hall cut her off. A vampire burst through the doors, young-looking but moving with that ageless grace they all shared. "My king," he called, and the entire hall fell silent. "Hunters." A group of them attacked the River District nest, 3 of ours dead, 2 more injured. They knew exactly where to strike. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees. Bastian went absolutely still beside her, and Ruby felt power rippling off him like heat waves in reverse, cold and immense and terrifying. When he spoke, his voice was devoid of all the warmth she'd come to associate with him. "How many hunters?" he asked. "At least 6, my king. They used silver and blessed weapons. They had information. Someone told them where our people would be." Betrayal. Ruby understood that implication even without knowing the details. Someone had sold out the vampires to these hunters. Bastian's hand on her arm tightened almost painfully before he seemed to realize and loosened his grip. "Convene my war council," he commanded. "Lysandra, you will lead the search for whoever provided information to the hunters. I want them found and brought before me. Marcus, increase protection on all nests and feeding grounds. No one travels alone until this threat is eliminated." The vampires scattered to obey, moving with supernatural speed. Within moments, only Bastian and Ruby remained in the vast hall, along with a few guards posted at the doors. "I need to deal with this," Bastian said, turning to face her. His eyes had gone darker somehow, more crimson than garnets now, the red of fresh blood. "I need you to go back to your chambers and stay there. Do not open the door for anyone except me. Do you understand?" "Bastian, what's happening?" "War," he said simply. "An old war that never truly ended. There are humans who know of our existence, who have decided that we are abominations to be destroyed. They call themselves hunters, and they have been killing my kind for centuries. Usually they strike at isolated vampires, easy targets. But if they are bold enough to attack a nest in my territory with knowledge of our locations, then they are declaring open conflict. And I must respond." Ruby's breath caught. "Will you be in danger?" Something in his expression softened at her concern. "I am a king, Ruby. I have survived for over 300 years through worse than this, but I need to know you are safe. You are human, which means the hunters would see you as someone to be rescued, not threatened. They might try to take you, to save you from me. I cannot allow that." "So I'm a prisoner now?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "You are protected," Bastian countered. "There is a difference. Ruby, please, I have already lost 3 of my people tonight. I cannot lose you as well." The raw emotion in his voice, the fear lurking beneath the commanding exterior, made Ruby's anger evaporate. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll stay in my room, but you have to promise me you'll be careful, and that you'll come back." "I promise." Bastian caught her hand, raised it to his lips in a gesture that seemed to come naturally to him from his long-ago human life. His lips were cold against her skin, but the kiss sent warmth flooding through her. "I will come back to you. That is an oath." He left her then, striding from the hall with his coat billowing behind him like dark wings. Ruby watched him go and realized with a start that she was terrified for him. Not of him, but for him. Somewhere in the past 3 days, the ancient vampire king had become important to her. Maybe more than important. Maybe something she couldn't afford to feel. The next 2 days were agony. Ruby remained in her chambers as promised, pacing the beautiful rooms like a caged animal. Servants brought her food and books, but she could barely eat, couldn't focus on reading. She heard raised voices sometimes, echoing through the building's corridors. Once, the sound of something crashing, like furniture being thrown. The vampires were hunting whoever had betrayed them, and from the tension radiating through the building, they hadn't found the culprit yet. Bastian came to her late on the evening of the second day. She heard his footsteps in the hall and threw open the door before he could knock, relief flooding through her at the sight of him. He looked exhausted in a way she hadn't seen before, as if immortality itself was weighing on him. "Are you all right?" Ruby asked, pulling him into the room. "We found the traitor," Bastian said, allowing himself to be led to the couch. "A young vampire, barely 50 years old, seduced by a hunter posing as a human sympathizer. He gave them locations, schedules, everything. He has been dealt with according to our laws." "Meaning?" "Meaning he is permanently dead. True death for betraying his covenant." Bastian leaned back, closing his eyes. 3 more of my people were killed tonight before we could stop another attack. I have lost 6 vampires, Ruby. 6 lives I was sworn to protect as their king, and we still have not located the hunter's base to retaliate. Ruby sat beside him, close enough that their thighs touched. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I know that probably doesn't mean much, but I am." "It means everything," Bastian replied, opening his eyes to look at her. "You're the only thing that has kept me grounded these past days. Knowing you were here, safe in these rooms, waiting for me, it gave me something beyond rage and grief to hold on to." "Tell me about them," Ruby said. "The ones you lost? You talk about vampires as if we're abstractions, humans who don't know you exist, but they were real to you. They mattered." So Bastian told her about Michaela, who had been a dancer in life and still performed at human theaters under assumed names, about Thomas and his human wife, who knew what he was and loved him anyway, now widowed, about Yuki, who had been a warrior in life and remained one in death, dying to protect the others when the hunters struck. He spoke of each with genuine grief, and Ruby found herself crying for these people she'd never met, mourning strangers who were more than the monster stories she'd grown up with. "You really care about them," she said, wiping at her tears. "They're not just subjects to you. They're family." "They are my responsibility," Bastian said. "I chose to be king. That means their lives are mine to protect, and I failed them." "No," Ruby said fiercely, surprising herself with her vehemence. "The hunters failed them. The traitor failed them. You're doing everything you can to keep the rest safe. That's all anyone can do, even a vampire king." Bastian looked at her with such intensity that Ruby felt pinned in place. "How do you do this?" he asked. "How do you see past every barrier I have constructed to the broken creature beneath? I am ancient and powerful and utterly lost when you look at me with such understanding in your eyes." "I see you because you let me," Ruby replied. "You've been alone so long that you forgot what it felt like to be truly seen. But I see you, Bastian, all of you, the king and the man, the predator and the protector, the loneliness and the hope." And as she stopped, afraid of what she was about to say. "What?" Bastian leaned closer, his cold hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Ruby, what were you going to say?" "I think I'm falling in love with you," she whispered, "which is insane because it's been 5 days and you're a vampire and I'm just a human and none of this makes any sense, but I can't stop thinking about you. I was terrified when you were gone. And when you walked through that door tonight, I wanted nothing more than to hold you and never let go." For a long moment, Bastian said nothing. He simply stared at her, his red eyes searching hers, looking for truth or deception, or maybe just confirmation. Then he smiled, that warm smile that had captivated her from the moment she'd spilled wine down his shirt, and she knew what his answer would be before he spoke. "I have been falling since the moment your trembling hands touched my chest," he said softly. "Since you looked at me with fear and wonder in your eyes and chose to be honest rather than flattering. I am 347 years old, Ruby Fletcher. I have had lovers and companions and countless humans cross my path, but none of them were you. None of them made me feel alive again. None of them gave me hope that perhaps eternity was not simply an endless parade of empty nights." "What does this mean?" Ruby asked, her heart racing. "What can this possibly mean when I'm mortal and you're not, when I have maybe 60 years left if I'm lucky and you have forever?" "It means," Bastian said, closing the distance between them until his forehead rested against hers, "that we have a choice to make. You can leave when your week is up tomorrow, and I will let you go as promised. You will return to your life, and I will return to my eternity, and we will both spend our remaining time wondering what might have been, or you can stay. And be what? Your pet human? A curiosity for your court to whisper about? No. Bastion pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. Stay as my equal. My partner. The one I've been waiting centuries to find. There are ways, Ruby. I could turn you, make you vampire as I am. You would have forever as well, and we would face it together. Or you could remain human, and I would treasure every single day of your mortal life, and when you died, I would follow you into whatever comes after, because an eternity without you would be no eternity at all. Ruby's breath caught. You would die for me. I would live for you first, Bastion said. But yes, if that is what you chose, if you wanted to remain human and mortal, I would stay by your side until the end and then join you. There are ways for vampires to meet the sun, to end our existence. I have avoided them for centuries because I had no reason compelling enough to take that step. But you, Ruby, you would be reason enough. It was too much. It was everything. Ruby felt tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the weight of what he was offering. I don't want you to die, she said, but I don't know if I'm brave enough to become what you are. I don't know anything. This is too fast, too big, too... Bastion silenced her with a kiss. His lips were cold against hers, but they gentled quickly, warming slightly from contact with her heat. It was careful and sweet, and absolutely devastating. Ruby melted into him, her hands coming up to tangle in his long white hair, pulling him closer despite the chill of his body. He kissed her like she was precious, like she might break, one hand cupping her face and the other wrapping around her waist. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing heavily despite only one of them needing air, Bastion rested his forehead against hers again. We have time, he murmured. Your week is not quite over. We have tomorrow still. Let us not make decisions born from fear or pressure. Let us simply be together and see what the night brings. Tomorrow, Ruby agreed. We'll figure it out tomorrow. They spent that night together, not making love, but something almost more intimate. They lay on her bed fully clothed, wrapped in each other's arms, and talked about everything and nothing. Bastion told her about his mortal life, about the family he'd lost to time and the pain of watching everyone he'd ever known die. Ruby told him about her dreams, the education she'd had to abandon for lack of money, the feeling of being adrift in a world that demanded so much and gave back so little. If you stayed, Bastion said softly near dawn, you would never want for anything. Every dream you had to set aside could be pursued. I have wealth beyond measure, Ruby, not because I need it, but because it accumulates over centuries. It would all be yours. Is that supposed to convince me? Ruby asked, though not unkindly. Offering to be my sugar daddy vampire king? He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest where her head rested. No, I merely want you to know that the practical concerns of mortal life would no longer bind you. Whether you choose to become vampire or remain human, whether you choose to stay or go, I want you to make that choice based on what your heart wants, not on fear of poverty or struggle. My heart wants you, Ruby admitted. That's the problem. My heart wants this fantasy where I get to be with you and everything works out perfectly. But my brain keeps screaming that this is crazy, that I barely know you, that people don't fall in love in less than a week. Don't they? Bastion tilted her face up to his. I think perhaps the concept of time itself is different for moments like these. You could know someone for years and never truly see them. Or you could meet someone and recognize them instantly as the other half of your soul. Duration is not the measure of connection, Ruby. Depth is. He was right, and she knew it. But that didn't make the choice any easier. Dawn came, filtered through heavy curtains. Bastion grew quieter as the sun rose, his body becoming more still, more statue-like. I should go, he said reluctantly. Daylight weakens me, and I would rest properly in my own chambers, but I will return at sunset. We will have this final evening together, and then you will decide. Can you grant me that? One more night? One more night, Ruby agreed. He kissed her once more, soft and lingering, before leaving her alone with her thoughts and the rising sun. Ruby spent the day in a haze of indecision. She tried to imagine her life back in her apartment, working double shifts and struggling to pay bills. It seemed impossibly far away now, like something from another person's life. But she also tried to imagine staying here, in this world of vampires and ancient power, forever set apart from the humanity she'd always known. Both futures seemed impossible. Both seemed inevitable. She was still no closer to a decision when sunset arrived and Bastian returned. He looked rested, restored, some of the weariness gone from his ageless face. He'd dressed carefully, she noticed, in a dark suit that made him look like a prince from a Gothic fairy tale. "I thought we might go out," he said. "One last adventure before you decide whether to stay or leave. Will you trust me?" Ruby dressed in another of the beautiful gowns he'd provided, this one midnight blue like the night sky. Together, they left the building that had been her home for a week, stepping out into the city she'd barely thought about in days. Bastian's car was waiting, his silent driver holding the door. They drove through the city as lights began to come on, painting the streets in gold and neon. Ruby watched the ordinary people going about their ordinary lives and felt a pang of something like nostalgia. Had she been one of them just 7 days ago? It seemed impossible. Bastian took her to a rooftop, one of the tallest buildings in the city. They stood at the edge, looking out over the glittering urban landscape spread below them like a carpet of stars. "This is my territory," Bastian said quietly. "Every light you see, every street and building, all of it falls under my protection. 8 million humans living their lives, unaware that creatures like me exist in their midst. I am responsible for keeping them safe, for ensuring that my kind feeds without killing, for maintaining the balance between our worlds. It is a burden I have carried for over a century." "You sound tired," Ruby observed. "I am tired. Immortality is exhausting, Ruby. You would think having forever would make things easier, but it is the opposite. Every decision has eternal consequences. Every loss is permanent. Every mistake echoes through centuries." He turned to her, taking both her hands in his cold ones. "Until I met you. You make me remember what it felt like to be young, to see each moment as precious rather than simply endless. You make me want to fight through my exhaustion and find joy again." "Bastian." "Let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I'm going to ask you to stay, to choose me, choose this life, choose us. But I want you to understand what I'm truly offering. If you stay as human, I will love you with everything in me for as long as you live. I will give you every experience, every pleasure, every dream you have ever had. And when your mortal life ends, I will follow you into death, because I cannot face eternity without you, now that I have known what it is to be with you." "And if I choose to turn?" Ruby asked, her voice shaking. "Very. Then I will make you vampire as I am." "It is not an easy transformation. There is pain and death and a rebirth into something new. You would need to drink my blood, and then die with it in your system, and then wake hungry for blood yourself. You would have to feed, to kill perhaps, in those first wild days before you learned control. You would lose the sunlight, the warmth of your living body, many of the simple pleasures of humanity. But you would gain forever. Forever with me. Forever to pursue your dreams. Forever to see and experience and become more than mortality allows." Ruby looked out over the city, feeling the weight of the decision crushing down on her. What if I choose neither? What if I just leave and try to forget any of this happened? "Then I will grieve," Bastian said simply. "But I will let you go. I promised you freedom of choice, Ruby. I will not take that from you no matter how much I want to." She believed him. That was the terrifying part. She believed absolutely that he would let her walk away, would honor his word even if it destroyed him. And she believed just as absolutely that she couldn't do it, couldn't walk away from this, from him, from the connection they'd forged in such a short time. "If I stay human," Ruby said slowly, thinking through the implications, "you said you would follow me into death when I die, but that would leave your people without a king. What happens to them?" Bastian blinked, clearly not having expected that question. "I would name a successor. Lysandra, perhaps, or Marcus, someone strong enough to hold the territory. And what about all those humans down there? You said you protect them, keep the balance. If you're gone, who ensures that continues?" "Ruby, what are you asking?" She turned to face him fully, her decision crystallizing with a clarity that felt like destiny. "I'm asking what happens to your responsibilities if you throw away your immortality for me. I'm asking if I can live with knowing that your death is my fault, and I'm realizing that I can't. I can't be the reason you abandon everything you've built, everyone you're sworn to protect." So you are leaving, Bastion said, and she heard the devastation in his voice. No, Ruby said, and watched hope flare in his red eyes. I'm staying, but not as a human. If I'm going to be with you, really be with you, I need to be your equal, not some fragile mortal you're constantly protecting, counting down the days until I die. I want forever, Bastion. I want forever with you. You're certain? His hands tightened on hers almost painfully. Ruby, once done, it cannot be undone. You will be vampire, dead to your old life. Everything you were will be transformed into something new. Are you absolutely certain? I'm terrified, Ruby admitted, but I'm certain. Turn me, make me vampire, make me yours. Bastion pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. You honor me beyond words, he whispered against her hair. I swear to you, I will make this worth it. I will spend eternity making this worth it. When? Ruby asked. How does this work? We should return home. The transformation is intense, and you will need privacy and safety. My own chambers are best, most protected. Bastion pulled back to look at her, his expression serious. It will hurt, Ruby. I will not lie to you about that. You will drink my blood, which will taste like copper and death. And then you will die. Your heart will stop, your breathing will cease, and for a time you will be truly dead. Then, if all goes well, you will wake again as something new. The pain during the transition is said to be excruciating, like burning from the inside out. But you'll be there? Ruby asked. I will not leave your side for a moment. Then I can endure it. They returned to his building in silence, both lost in thought about what was to come. Ruby felt strangely calm, as if now that the decision was made, all her anxiety had simply evaporated. This was right. It felt right in her bones, in her soul, in whatever part of her had recognized Bastion from that first moment of connection. Bastion's private chambers were even more luxurious than the rooms Ruby had been staying in. The bed was enormous, draped in dark fabrics. Candles burned everywhere, filling the space with soft golden light. He led her to the bed and they sat facing each other, hands clasped between them. Last chance, Bastion said softly. If you have any doubts, any at all, speak them now. There is no shame in changing your mind. No doubts, Ruby said firmly. I want this. I want you. I want us. Make me vampire, Bastion. Make me yours forever. He nodded, then with a gesture that seemed more ceremonial than necessary, he unbuttoned his cuff and rolled up his sleeve. His forearm was pale and smooth, veins visible beneath translucent skin, despite the lack of heartbeat to pump blood through them. He bit into his own wrist with fangs that extended for the purpose, and dark blood welled up, almost black in the candlelight. Drink, he commanded, offering his wrist to her lips. You need to take enough that it saturates your system. It will taste terrible. You may feel sick, but you must drink deeply, Ruby. Your life depends on it. Ruby pressed her lips to his cold skin and began to drink. He was right. It tasted like copper and death, bitter and thick and wrong in every way. Her stomach rebelled immediately, nausea rolling through her. But she forced herself to swallow, to keep drinking as his blood filled her mouth. She felt it sliding down her throat, cold and foreign, spreading through her system like ice water in her veins. Enough, Bastion said after what felt like an eternity. He pulled his arm back and the wound closed as she watched, sealing itself with supernatural healing. Now we wait. The pain started almost immediately. Ruby gasped, doubling over as her stomach cramped. It felt like she'd swallowed poison, like her body was rejecting the vampire blood at a cellular level. She looked up at Bastion, panic in her eyes. I know, he said, gathering her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. I know it hurts. Just breathe through it. Your body is dying, Ruby. All your mortal systems are shutting down. This is necessary, but I am here. I have you. The pain intensified, spreading from her stomach to her chest, her limbs, her head. It felt like her blood was boiling, like every nerve was on fire. Ruby heard herself screaming, couldn't stop even though she wanted to, needed to. Her heart was racing, beating frantically as if trying to escape her chest. And then, slowly, it began to slow. Beat, 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 long pauses between each one. Bastion, she gasped, terrified. Something's wrong. My heart is supposed to stop, he finished, holding her tighter. You are dying now, Ruby. Truly dying. Let it happen. Trust me. Trust us. I will be right here when you wake. Beat. Nothing. Ruby felt her heart stop, felt her lungs cease their desperate attempts to draw breath. The pain faded, replaced by a strange numbness that spread through her body. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. She was dimly aware of Bastian still holding her, of him speaking words she couldn't quite hear. And then there was nothing at all. Death was cold and dark and lasted forever, and no time at all. Ruby opened her eyes. Everything was different. The room was brighter despite the dim candles, every detail sharp and clear. She could see individual dust motes floating in the air, could count the threads in the tapestries on the walls. Sound rushed in, overwhelming. She heard Bastian's voice, heard footsteps in distant corridors, heard the rustle of fabric and the settling of the building and 1,000 other things her human ears had never been able to perceive. And she smelled blood. Her head whipped toward the door, where she could sense someone standing guard outside. Human, alive, warm. The scent of their blood hit her like a physical blow, and suddenly Ruby was ravenous in a way she'd never experienced, starving, dying for want of what that person's veins contained. Ruby. Bastian's voice cut through the hunger haze. Look at me. Look at me. She turned to him and saw him clearly for the first time with vampire eyes. He was luminous, beautiful beyond anything human sight could have shown her. But more than that, he was powerful. She could sense it radiating from him like heat, the sheer force of his age and authority. Her king, something inside her whispered, her mate. I'm hungry, she said, and her voice was different, richer, layered with harmonics that hadn't been there before. Bastian, I'm so hungry. I know, it is the worst part of the transformation. The new hunger is all-consuming at first. He moved to the table and returned with a glass filled with dark liquid. Blood. Drink this. It is human blood, freely given by donors who serve our covenant. It will take the edge off until we can take you hunting properly. Ruby snatched the glass from his hand, with speed that startled her, drinking desperately. The blood was cold, less satisfying than the living heat she could sense beyond the door, but it helped. She could think again, could push past the screaming need. How do you feel? Bastian asked, watching her with concern and pride mixed in his expression. Different. Everything is different. Ruby looked down at her hands, saw that they were paler than before, taking on that luminous quality all vampires shared. Is it always this intense? The sensory input will settle over the next few days as you adjust. The hunger is something you will learn to control, though it never completely goes away. You are vampire now, Ruby. Forever changed, forever mine if you still want to be. I want to be, Ruby said, setting down the empty glass and moving to him with speed that felt natural, despite being impossible by human standards. She wrapped her arms around him and felt his cold body match her own temperature now. They were the same, equal, partners in eternity. I love you, Bastian. I think I loved you from the moment you laughed when I spilled that wine. And I love you, he replied, tilting her face up to kiss her properly. It was different now, cold lips on cold lips, no warmth between them, but heat of a different kind. Passion, desire, love that transcended temperature or mortality. My Ruby, my unexpected gift, my reason to believe that forever might not be so endless after all. They stayed like that for a long time, simply holding each other, adjusting to this new reality. Ruby had 1,000 questions about her new existence, about feeding and powers and what it meant to be vampire. But those could wait. For now, all that mattered was that she was here, she was his, and they had forever to figure out the rest. Eventually, Bastian led her back out into his court. The vampires who had been wary or hostile to her before now looked at her differently. She was one of them now, transformed and elevated. More than that, she was the king's chosen. That servant girl had been right days ago. Ruby might not have understood it then, but she understood now. By bringing her to his court, by protecting her so fiercely, by choosing to turn her rather than let her go, Bastian had made a declaration. She was his consort in all but official title. Lysandra approached them, her expression unreadable. My king, she said with a formal bow, and Ruby Fletcher, newly risen, welcome to immortality. There was something in her voice that might have been resentment or might have been respect, possibly both. Thank you, Lysandra, Ruby said, pleased that her voice came out steady despite her lingering nervousness around the older vampire. The hunters have been found, Lysandra continued, addressing Bastion now. We have their location. Marcus is preparing a strike team to eliminate the threat. No, Bastion said firmly. We do not respond to violence with more violence unless necessary. I will go to them myself and offer terms. They may cease their attacks and leave our territory, or they may face the consequences, but they will be given the choice. Lysandra looked like she wanted to argue, but she bowed her head in acceptance. As you command, my king. After she left, Ruby turned to Bastion. You're going to negotiate with the people who killed 6 of your vampires? I'm going to try to prevent more death on both sides, Bastion corrected. Hunters kill because they believe we are monsters. Sometimes they are right, but sometimes we can prove them wrong. I am not naive enough to think all of them will listen, but I must make the attempt. It is what separates us from the mindless monsters they fear. Then I'm coming with you, Ruby said. Absolutely not. You are barely transformed, still learning control. It is far too dangerous. Bastion. Ruby moved to stand directly in front of him, meeting his eyes without fear. She was vampire now, no longer the trembling human who needed constant protection. I am your partner, your equal. You said so yourself. That means I stand beside you, not behind you. If you are going to face these hunters, then I'm going too. For a long moment he simply looked at her, emotions warring in his expression. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. Very well, he said. But you stay close to me, and if I tell you to run, you run. Agreed? Agreed. They left within the hour, taking several other vampires, including Marcus, who commanded Bastion's guard. The hunters had holed up in an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city, believing themselves hidden, but unaware that vampires had senses far beyond human norm. Bastion could smell them from blocks away, could hear their heartbeats and whispered conversations. Let me approach first, Bastion said as they stood outside the factory. Alone. They will be less threatened by a single vampire than a group. Not alone, Ruby said. We go together. They need to see that we are more than the monsters they imagine. Show them a vampire who loves, who cares, who builds a life with someone rather than simply taking from humans. Show them us. Bastion looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Together, then. They walked through the factory doors, hand in hand. The hunters reacted immediately, raising weapons that gleamed with silver. Ruby counted 6 of them, all dressed in dark tactical gear, all armed and clearly experienced. But they looked surprised to see Bastion enter so openly, even more surprised to see Ruby beside him. I am Bastion Beaumont, he announced, his voice carrying through the space with natural authority. King of the Vampire Covenant of this city, you have been killing my people. I am here to offer you a choice. Leave our territory and never return, and we will consider your attack settled. Or stay and continue this war, and I will be forced to eliminate you. Choose wisely. We don't negotiate with monsters, one of the hunters said, a man with graying hair and hard eyes. You're abominations, all of you. You kill innocents and spread your plague. The world would be better off without your kind. And yet here I stand, Bastion replied calmly, offering you peace instead of retribution, giving you a choice instead of simply eliminating a threat. Does that sound like a mindless monster to you? It sounds like a manipulative demon trying to trick us, another hunter said. This one a younger woman with her weapon trained directly on Ruby. And who's that? Another vampire? Or a human you've enthralled? I am Ruby Beaumont, Ruby said, using Bastion's name without conscious thought, claiming it as her own. I was human until yesterday. I chose to become vampire. I chose him. Not because I was enthralled or manipulated, but because I fell in love. Because he showed me that vampires are not simply monsters, but people, complex and capable of both darkness and light. You're a fool then, the gray-haired hunter said. He'll tire of you eventually, use you up and discard you. That's what they do. No, Ruby said firmly. That's what you imagine we do because it is easier to kill something you have reduced to a caricature. But we are real. We love and grieve and protect what is ours. We are different from humans, yes, but different does not mean evil. She's right, Bastion added. We can coexist. We have been coexisting for centuries, hidden in plain sight, feeding without killing, maintaining the balance. The vampires I rule are bound by strict laws. We do not kill our donors. We do not create new vampires recklessly. We police our own and eliminate those who cannot control their nature. We are not the enemy you imagine." The hunters exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. They had come here expecting a straightforward battle, monsters to slay. Instead, they found a king negotiating and a woman testifying to her choice. "How do we know you won't just hunt us down if we leave?" the young woman asked. "You have my word," Bastian said. "Leave now, and you may go in peace. I will not pursue you beyond the borders of my territory. But if you return, if you attack my people again, there will be no more negotiations. I will defend what is mine with every resource at my disposal." The gray-haired hunter, clearly their leader, lowered his weapon slowly. "I want assurances, proof that you can control your covenant. How do we know other vampires won't continue killing innocents?" "You have my oath as king," Bastian replied. "And if you discover evidence of a vampire in my territory killing unlawfully, bring that evidence to me. I will deal with them according to our laws. We police ourselves, but we welcome information that helps us maintain order." It was a risk, Ruby realized. Bastian was offering these hunters a way to continue their work without direct conflict. A partnership of sorts, though neither side would probably use that word. But it was brilliant. It gave the hunters a way to walk away while still feeling like they were protecting people. And it gave Bastian allies, however reluctant, in maintaining the peace. After a long, tense moment, the leader nodded. "We'll leave, but we'll be watching. If we hear reports of vampires killing innocents in this city, we'll be back." "That is fair," Bastian said. "Then we have an accord." The hunters backed out slowly, never quite turning their backs on the vampires, weapons still ready but not aimed. Ruby watched them go and felt a weight lift from her chest. This could have been a bloodbath. Instead, it was a treaty, fragile and new, but a chance at peace nonetheless. "That was remarkable," Marcus said once the hunters were gone. "I did not think they would listen." "Neither did I," Bastian admitted. He turned to Ruby, pulling her close. "But you were right. Showing them that we are more than monsters, that we can love and choose and build lives, that made the difference. Thank you." "We're partners," Ruby said simply. "That means we face everything together." They returned to the court as dawn approached, both exhausted from the night's events. Ruby could feel the pull of the sun even though it hadn't risen yet, an instinctive urge to seek darkness and sleep. Bastian led her back to his chambers, their chambers now, she realized. This was her home now, this impossible world of vampires and eternal night. "No regrets?" Bastian asked as they lay down together as the first hints of dawn colored the sky beyond the heavily curtained windows. "None," Ruby said honestly. "I mean, I'm sure I'll have moments of doubt as I adjust, moments where I miss the sun or human food or all the little things I gave up. But this? Us? I don't regret this. I will spend eternity making sure you never do," Bastian promised. He pulled her closer, and she tucked herself against his side, marveling at how perfectly they fit together now. Two cold beings generating their own kind of heat through connection and love. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of adjustment and discovery. Ruby learned to feed properly, to control her hunger, to use the enhanced senses and strength that came with vampirism. Bastian was endlessly patient, teaching her everything she needed to know, introducing her properly to his court as his consort and partner. Some of the vampires remained skeptical, but most came to accept her. She was different from them, transformed rather than ancient, but she carried herself with a confidence that came from Bastian's absolute faith in her. And slowly, she began to understand what it meant to be part of this hidden world. She attended court sessions where Bastian mediated disputes between vampires, where he made decisions that affected the entire covenant. She learned about vampire politics, about the delicate relationships between different territories, about the endless maneuvering for power and position that came with immortality. And she learned that being queen, which was effectively what she was even without the formal title, meant being responsible for all of it alongside him. It was overwhelming and exhausting and occasionally terrifying, but it was also extraordinary. Ruby found herself coming alive in ways she never had as a struggling human. She had purpose now, partnership, a place in the world that felt right. 3 months after her transformation, Bastian called his entire court together for a formal gathering. Ruby dressed carefully, knowing something important was happening, but not quite sure what. When she entered the great hall, every vampire in the covenant was assembled, hundreds of them gathered in their finest clothes. Bastian stood at the front in formal regalia, wearing a crown of silver and rubies that caught the light like frozen fire. He looked every inch a king, powerful and ancient and magnificent. When he saw Ruby, his face softened into that warm smile she loved. "Ruby Beaumont," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "Come forward." Ruby walked through the assembled vampires, feeling their eyes on her, but no longer afraid. She was one of them now. She belonged here. She reached Bastian's side and he took her hand, pulling her to stand beside him facing the court. "3 months ago," Bastian said, "I brought a human woman before you. Many questioned my judgment. Some wondered if I had lost my mind in my isolation. I told you then that she was under my protection, that she was my honored guest. But the truth was deeper than that. The moment I met Ruby Fletcher, I knew she was extraordinary, and in the time since, she has proven it again and again." He turned to face her fully, still holding her hand. "You challenged me to be better. You showed me what it means to truly live rather than simply exist. You stood beside me when facing danger, offered wisdom beyond your years, and brought light back into a life that had known only darkness for far too long. You are my partner, my equal, and the love I thought I would never find." Bastian knelt then, and the entire hall gasped. A king kneeling before anyone was unheard of. But he did it anyway, looking up at Ruby with such love in his red eyes that she felt tears she could no longer cry trying to form. "Ruby Beaumont," he said formally, "I ask you to be not just my consort but my queen in truth. Will you rule beside me? Will you share not just my life but my crown? Will you be queen of this covenant, with all the responsibility and honor that entails?" Ruby looked down at him, at this ancient, powerful being humbling himself before her and their entire court. She thought about the scared waitress who had spilled wine 7 days ago in what felt like another lifetime. She thought about all the choices that had led her to this moment, and she thought about the future, an eternal future, standing beside this man who had become her everything. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear, "I will be your queen, your partner, your love, today and forever." Bastian rose and produced a second crown, smaller than his but no less beautiful, worked in silver with rubies that matched her name. He placed it on her head with reverent care, then turned her to face the assembled court. "I present to you," he announced, "Queen Ruby Beaumont, my partner in rule and in life. You will show her the same loyalty and respect you show me. Her word is law, her protection absolute. We rule together now, as equals, as partners, as one." The vampires dropped to their knees as one, even proud Lysandra, acknowledging their new queen. Ruby stood there beside Bastian, wearing a crown she never could have imagined, facing a future that stretched out into eternity, and felt something she had never really felt before in her difficult human life. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. That night, after the formalities and celebrations had ended, Ruby and Bastian stood together on the same rooftop where he had asked her to stay all those months ago. The city glittered below them, millions of lives going on unaware of the supernatural beings who moved through their midst. "Do you miss it?" Bastian asked softly. "The sun? Human life? All the things you gave up?" Ruby considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I miss summer afternoons and the taste of chocolate and the feeling of a hot bath on cold skin. But I don't mourn them. They were part of my old life, and I loved them then. But this is my life now, and I love it more. Even the politics and responsibility and endless nights, especially those, because I faced them with you." Ruby turned to him, taking both his hands in hers. "You gave me more than immortality, Bastian. You gave me purpose, partnership, a place to belong. I was adrift before I met you, just surviving day to day with no real direction. Now I have everything. How could I regret that?" "I love you," Bastian said simply. "I have loved before. In my long life, brief, passionate affairs that burned bright and faded quickly. But this is different. You are different. You are the one I will love until the world ends and beyond. My Ruby, my queen, my forever." "And you are mine," Ruby replied. "My unexpected vampire king who laughed when I spilled wine on him and somehow saw something worth saving in one nervous human girl. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for giving me this extraordinary life." They kissed there on the rooftop as the city lived and breathed below them, two immortal beings who had found in each other what they had each been missing. Love, true and deep and eternal. a partnership built on trust and respect and genuine connection. A future that stretched out into forever, full of possibility and promise. Ruby thought back to that night in the restaurant, to the moment the tray had tilted and the wine had spilled, and her entire world had changed. She had been so afraid then, so certain that she had ruined everything. And she had, in a way. She had ruined her old life, her ordinary existence, her mortal future. But in its place, she had gained something immeasurably better. She had gained immortality and power, yes, but more importantly, she had gained love. Real love. The kind that transcended species and mortality and logic, the kind of love that made eternity seem not like an endless burden, but an adventure to be shared with the right person. The kind of love that started with a spilled glass of wine and a warm laugh and grew into forever. Ruby Beaumont, Vampire Queen, stood beside her king and looked out at their city, their territory, their world, and knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. Every single one of them, from the moment she had walked into that restaurant, to the moment she had said yes to transformation, to the moment she had accepted the crown. This was her life now, as eternal, complicated, occasionally dangerous, but filled with purpose and love and a partnership that made every challenge worth facing. She squeezed Bastion's hand, felt him squeeze back, and smiled. Forever had never looked so beautiful.